A human captain dies to cross the impassable and returns. Her sacrifice opens the path to a lost civilization beyond space, where death is the key to travel. One by one, she and her crew pass impossible tests, a mirror of identity, a silence of regret, a forge of rebirth, and a paradox beyond time. Each journey reshapes them physically, mentally, existentially, until they become more than explorers. Stay with us to find out how humanity redefines life, death, and what lies beyond the stars, and don't forget to subscribe. The Grand Council Chamber of the Galactic Alliance was a place where centuries of interstellar diplomacy echoed with every measured word, where even the silence carried the weight of history. But as Captain Maya Chin stepped through its arched entrance, that silence thickened, no longer the product of reverent consideration, but of startled recalibration. Her magnetic boots struck the obsidian floor with steady precision, each step a defiance against the anti-gravity norms practiced by the 23 alien species hovering above it. She wore her Earth Defense Force uniform like armor, unyielding despite the strains of interstellar travel. At 35, Maya carried the air of someone who had walked through fire and survived. The silvery scars tracing up her neck and vanishing into her hairline were not hidden, nor explained. They were proof of survival, of lessons earned in vacuum and blood. High Consul Zor descended from his pedestal, a being of luminous gases held within an exoskeletal frame of gold and crystal, the flickering brilliance of his form dimming as he addressed the human delegate. Captain Shin of Terra, you are granted observer status at this emergency session, he said in a voice that oscillated across frequencies. Your species, having only recently mastered rudimentary spatial traversal, may benefit from seeing how true masters of the void resolve crises. Maya offered no correction, though the slight tightening around her jaw suggested restraint. Humanity had navigated the stars for nearly 300 years. But to civilizations that measured progress in epochs, Terra was still in its cosmic adolescence. She bowed slightly, a universal gesture of deference that transcended biology. I am honored to witness the Alliance's wisdom, she replied evenly. A projection shimmered into view at the chamber's center. It displayed a volatile tear in space-time, a wound in the cosmos that pulsed and flickered with colors beyond the visible spectrum. Maya squinted as it shifted between wavelengths no human eye was meant to parse. This anomaly emerged 3 solar cycles ago in the Vega Quadrant, announced Krill, the insectoid senior scientist whose compound eyes refracted the projection's light in hypnotic mosaics. Our data indicates a gateway to an uncharted region of space, rich in habitable worlds and resource abundance. Maya's attention sharpened. Earth's overcrowded billions had long chafed against the limits of known colonizable space. A discovery like this could reshape humanity's future. But Krill's upper limbs gestured to the next segment of the display, one that chilled even Maya's battle-hardened blood. However, crossing requires traversing a 63-meter band of what we've designated as pure void, a region in which fundamental physics collapse. Propulsion, shielding, life support, all fail. The chamber darkened as footage rolled. Vessels of increasing sophistication made the attempt, AI-guided probes, reinforced cruisers, even organic lattice crafts piloted by vacuum-tolerant species. Each approach ended the same: systems failing, hulls disintegrating, life extinguished. 17 attempts. 17 total failures, High Consul Zur declared grimly. The Alliance has unanimously voted to quarantine the anomaly. Without waiting for acknowledgement, Maya stepped forward. With respect, I request access to the failure data. A ripple of discomfort passed through the council, equal parts amusement and dismay. It was Thrax, a methane-breathing giant, who voiced their collective skepticism. And what would Terra's primitive science uncover that we have not? Maya met his gaze evenly. A fresh perspective. Sometimes, the problem isn't what you know, it's how you're seeing it. After a reluctant vote, limited access was granted. Maya buried herself in sensor data, telemetry logs, physiological readouts. The patterns emerged not in the mechanics of the failures, but in what they revealed about the assumptions behind them. And that's when she realized, the Alliance wasn't approaching the void incorrectly, they were refusing to relinquish what couldn't be carried through it. When she stood again before the council, her tone was no longer diplomatic. The problem, she began, is that you're trying to preserve continuity of consciousness, of structure, of life through the void. But what if continuity isn't the point? What if survival requires a discontinuity, a temporary cessation, rather than endurance? The chamber fell into confusion. The translator systems buckled slightly as her meaning stretched the linguistic matrix. It was Zur who pressed her. Explain. She uploaded classified footage from Earth's earliest space disasters, followed by newer experiments under Project Lazarus, human trials involving short-term exposure to vacuum. Gasps echoed as the images showed revival after clinical death. She displayed her own medical records. 3 minutes in vacuum. Revival successful. Impossible, Krill murmured. Complete systemic shutdown is not recoverable. Yet here I stand, Maya replied. I've survived 187 seconds of full exposure. And our Lazarus protocol has stretched that to 5 minutes in controlled environments. Admiral Vorch, scarred, crystalline, and ancient, raised a limb for silence. You intend to enter the void personally, Captain Shin? Yes, Maya confirmed. But not in defiance of its effects and surrender. We won't resist the void. We'll die crossing it and return after. Shock does not translate equally across species, but in that moment, the council chamber transcended language. Maya showed them her suit, archaic by their standards, but designed for shutdown and reanimation rather than protection. Its core was not shielding, but resurrection. Zor's glow dimmed in contemplative signal. Never have we encountered a species who uses death as method of passage. Humanity excels at turning vulnerabilities into advantages, Maya replied. We've survived the unsurvivable not through strength, but through adaptation. Deliberations consumed hours. The vote was divided. But eventually, permission came with caveats. The mission would be human. No aid, no political consequences. An independent act of reckless courage. As Maya left, Admiral Vorch intercepted her. Your kind confounds us. Most species prioritize survival above all. Yet yours chooses death for progress. Maya's answer was simple, because we've never truly believed death is the end. The preparation chamber aboard the Eternal Inquiry, one of the Alliance's most advanced science vessels, buzzed with low, mechanical activity. Inside, Maya Chin lay at the center of a cold metallic cradle, encased in the prototype Lazarus suit. Medical personnel, a mixture of humanoid and non-humanoid specialists, moved around her like hesitant shadows. Though their instruments were precise and procedures practiced, the discomfort in the air was unmistakable. They weren't just prepping her for a mission, they were preparing her for death. The suit was unlike anything the Alliance had ever designed. Primitive in its construction compared to their nanofiber exosuits, but built with a singular, audacious purpose. Molecular stabilizers were arranged like armor over Maya's vital organs. Neural taps coiled from the suit into her spinal column, each one synced to the resurrection module embedded at the base of her skull. The human mind was not designed for true cessation, but Project Lazarus had brought humanity closer to that boundary than any species had dared. Krill approached, a vial of luminescent blue fluid clutched in one of his segmented limbs. His voice crackled softly. The neural suspension serum. This will saturate your cerebral network and preserve thought architecture during shutdown. Maya held out her arm without hesitation. In our mythology, she said calmly, this is crossing the river Styx. Krill paused. A myth of death? And the ferryman who brings you back, she added with a faint smile. She tapped the module at her neck. In this case, science is my ferryman. He administered the serum. Cold fire coursed through her veins. One by one, her biological systems began decelerating as the chemical cocktail reprogrammed her body to die in stages, slowly, systematically, and with a predetermined return. By the time she was escorted to the launch bay, Maya's skin had grown pale. Her breath shallow. Her heart rate was a mechanical metronome guided by the Lazarus suit. The launch capsule awaiting her was brutally simplistic, a titanium coffin propelled by magnetic acceleration. It had no life support, no return vector, no shielding. Because she would not need them. Maya would not live through the void. Admiral Vorch's crystalline face appeared on the capsule's comms display one last time. The Council maintains its position, he said with gravity. Your methods defy natural law. But your courage is, noted. Should you succeed, our understanding of existence itself must be reevaluated. Understood, Maya replied. We have a saying on Earth, the impossible only exists until someone does it. The capsule sealed shut. The vibration of launch built beneath her as electromagnetic rails prepared to fire. Maya leaned her head back and exhaled. In her ear, the suit's AI began its final countdown. 10 seconds. The anomaly loomed ahead like a shimmering vortex. Its light twisted in ways that defied causality, swallowing stars behind it and bleeding into spectra that bent logic. 5 seconds. Every redundant system flickered and died. Radiation shielding failed by design. The last telemetry packets were transmitted. 2 seconds. Maya activated the Lazarus protocol. Instantly, cold filled her. Muscle fibers locked. Her heart slowed to one beat every 15 seconds. Synapses dulled and finally ceased. The resurrection module began a full neuromap backup as internal heaters clicked off. Then the capsule crossed the boundary. The transition was not violent. It was the absence of violence. A moment where time stopped, where space had no meaning, where even gravity forgot what it was. The capsule's hull disintegrated molecularly, atom by atom. Maya's body, now effectively dead, passed through a state where matter and energy became abstract concepts. Then there was nothing. Not sleep. Not darkness. Just absence. And then, pain. A searing, cellular agony, as if every molecule was being dragged back into existence by force. The resurrection module jolted Maya's nervous system like a lightning strike. Her lungs spasmed. Her heart restarted with a shudder. She vomited inside the sealed helmet, instantly reabsorbed by emergency protocols. Air. Sound. Neural signals. Her eyes opened. Stars. Unfamiliar constellations glimmered through the helmet's visor. The suit's transparent faceplate confirmed what she already knew. The capsule was gone. She floated freely in open space, her body barely stabilized by the Lazarus suit's emergency bubble. Behind her, the anomaly shimmered, no longer a threat but a gateway. And beyond it, distant and faint, the lights of the Alliance science vessel flickered into view. She had crossed. And lived. Locator beacons activated. Automated emergency protocols transmitted her life signs and position. Maya's body remained weak, her muscles trembling with effort, but her mind was clear. She floated in that eternal silence for nearly 7 hours before an Alliance scout ship reached her position. The medical bay she awoke in was unlike anything she'd seen before. The walls pulsed softly with bioorganic circuits. Light flowed like liquid through fiber channels. The air was subtly charged with the scent of ozone and something floral. A being approached her, bipedal, tall, and clad in flowing garments of iridescent material. Its skin shifted in color with every movement, like fluid trapped beneath glass. "Welcome to Nexus Station, Captain Chin," the being said. "I am Coordinator Vash of the Rim Confederation." Maya blinked. "You are not Alliance?" "No," Vash replied with amusement shimmering across his skin. "The Alliance has long suspected our existence, but failed to establish contact. The anomaly prevented it. Until now." Her breathing slowed. Awareness flooded back in pulses. Nexus Station, Rim Confederation, a region of space never explored by Alliance species. "I'm the first to reach you," Maya realized aloud. "You are the first living being to do so," Vash corrected gently. "You crossed the fracture through death and returned." In the days that followed, Maya recovered rapidly. Her suit was studied, an artifact of hybrid biology and brute force resilience. The Confederation's medical technology, far more attuned to neural and dimensional anomalies, accelerated her restoration. And when she could finally walk unaided again, representatives from both sides of the void gathered. Via quantum relay, the Galactic Alliance and the Rim Confederation convened to witness a moment they had never imagined. Peaceful, successful contact, enabled not by superior engineering or raw power, but by the will of one human to die and return. Maya stood before them, steadied by effort and defiance. "Humanity's history," she said, "is a story of crossing thresholds. From oceans to skies, skies to stars. This was just one more. A final boundary, once believed absolute. The void had been tamed, not by resisting its nature, but by surrendering to it, and coming back." The fracturing silence of the past had now given way to a quiet storm of diplomatic upheaval. Maya Chun, once merely a representative observer from an underestimated species, had become something more, an emissary between worlds. Her return from the impossible had turned centuries of scientific dogma into dust, forcing the Alliance and the Rim Confederation to reevaluate not only each other, but themselves. Within Nexus Station, Maya walked the corridors like a paradox. Every glance she received, from shimmering-skinned Confederation engineers to multi-limbed Alliance scientists visiting via newly installed diplomatic corridors, carried awe, discomfort, and a hunger for understanding. She was not just a human anymore. She was the proof. The Alliance had dispatched an official delegation to establish formal contact with the Confederation, and Maya was the bridge, literally and symbolically. Her arrival had paved the way, and now the stream of scientific, diplomatic, and philosophical exchange had begun to flow in both directions. Chief Scientist Alara of the Rim Confederation addressed a joint assembly from a crystalline platform that shimmered in and out of phase. Her body, multi-phased and partially non-corporeal, was a marvel in itself. "We have always perceived death as a terminus," she said, "a limit to thought, motion, and meaning. But the Terran method implies a new interpretation. Death as an interstitial state, a tool. The implications are," she hesitated, her multiple voice tones overlapping, profound. Via quantum relay, High Consul Zur responded with restrained gravity. "We are forced to reconsider foundational axioms. We long believed life could only navigate space through continuity of self. Captain Chin's journey demonstrates discontinuity can be traversed, cataloged, and reversed." Maya, standing beside a floating hologram of her mission telemetry, remained silent as they debated. She had already spoken. She had been the message. What followed was a storm of collaboration. Both sides poured resources into understanding how Project Lazarus had achieved its success. Human scientists were suddenly in demand. Earth's crude engineering was no longer seen as backwards, but as courageous and unconventional. The Confederation offered access to materials that could stabilize consciousness across dimensional boundaries. The Alliance contributed quantum lattice computing to refine revival protocols. Within 3 months, the first joint Lazarus array was constructed on the border of the fracture, a research station orbiting the anomaly itself. From there, a new kind of exploration began, carefully choreographed jumps through the void, using human couriers as carriers of data, materials, and even genetic samples. Maya watched as a new generation of volunteers, Terran Marines, engineers, even civilians, underwent the Lazarus modifications. There were risks, neural degradation, cellular stress, but the success rate was rising. Controlled death was becoming routine. And with every successful crossing, humanity's influence grew. For centuries, Earth had been tolerated in the Alliance, invited to observe, sometimes assist, but never shape. Now, it was humanity who controlled the only reliable conduit between the Alliance and the Confederation. Every message, every sample, every ambassador passed through human hands, through death, and back. Some alien factions resisted the implications. The Tlur, a deeply conservative species whose entire cultural identity was built around the sanctity of continuous life, called for Earth's quarantine. This death cult, their speaker declared, violates the sacred boundaries set by the cosmos. To die willingly is a crime against all biological reason. Others, however, were captivated. The Vozari, shape-shifting scholars who had spent millennia studying entropic boundaries, petitioned to train under human guidance. The crystalline Enthrens sent their own biological proxies to Earth for exposure to Project Lazarus. And within the Alliance Council, murmurs began to spread. Was humanity still a junior member? Or something more? On Earth, public perception shifted with dizzying speed. Maya Chin became a global icon, celebrated, scrutinized, mythologized. Statues were commissioned. Documentaries produced. Religious leaders argued over the implications. Was she proof of the soul's survival? Was Lazarus a resurrection or a cheat? Maya ignored the noise. She returned to Geneva after 6 months aboard the Lazarus Array, her body still recovering from microneural stress, but her mind sharper than ever. Before the Earth Council, she delivered her assessment. Our uniqueness is no longer in what we invent, she said. It is in what we are willing to risk. No other species has embraced death as a vehicle. That perspective is what the galaxy lacks and needs. One counselor asked cautiously, do you believe this technique, this controlled death, has broader applications? Yes, Maya replied. The Confederation believes we may be able to explore regions even more hostile than the void. Neutron star interiors, black hole event horizons, temporal vortices. With proper adaptation, death may become the safest way to travel through danger. Silence. Not out of disbelief, but awe. Maya turned her gaze skyward, as if speaking not just to the Council, but to history itself. We crossed the final threshold, she said, not because we could, but because we had to. And in the depths of Nexus Station, deep in the research archives, a file was created and shared across the Confederation and Alliance alike. Project Thanatos. The next evolution. A journey not just through space, but through death, time, and beyond. The birth of Project Thanatos marked a turning point not just for humanity, but for galactic civilization as a whole. What began as a desperate gamble to cross a spatial anomaly now spiraled into something far more profound, the systematic study of death as a transit mechanism. And Maya Chin, dead and returned, stood at the center of it. She had expected scrutiny. She had not expected reverence. Within Nexus Station's concentric halls, where the Confederation's bioarchitectural marvels merged with the Alliance's sleek crystalline structures, a new order of cooperation began to form. It wasn't governed by ancient treaties or hierarchical councils. It was bound by shared astonishment and necessity. The anomaly had been only the beginning. Scouting probes launched from the Lazarus Array revealed several more fractures in the surrounding region, points in space where physics bent, time staggered, and the laws of matter melted into chaos. The Confederation had long suspected their existence. Now, with human couriers capable of returning from the unknown, exploration was no longer theory. The challenge was no longer about merely surviving the void. It was about venturing into places where existence blurred, where time looped, where gravitational constants inverted, where space itself pulsed like a living thing. Places where death was not just a tool, but a necessity. The first mission beyond the anomaly was codenamed Descent 1. A 5-person team, 3 humans, 1 Alliance technician, and a Confederation phase biologist prepared to enter a fracture near the Sirius Rift, where preliminary scans suggested temporal fluctuations bordering on stasis. Maya was chosen to lead them, not because of rank, but because she had been there first. The team assembled in the new Lazarus chamber, deep within the array, shielded by layers of spatial dampeners and quantum anchors. The process had evolved. The suspension serum was more stable. The suits now used hybrid tech, merging Terran biological knowledge with Confederation phase stabilization. But the essence was the same. Controlled death, Maya told the crew before their first test, isn't a shortcut. It's a commitment. When we cross over, there are no guarantees, no anchors. We surrender the idea of self-preservation for the chance to come back with knowledge no one else can. The Confederation biologist, Alinth, whose body flickered between solidity and energy, responded in a voice that seemed to echo in 3 places at once. Terran bravery continues to unsettle us. You approach mortality like a negotiable clause in a contract. Maya grinned. That's because we've always lived like we're dying. Now we've just weaponized it. The mission launched with minimal ceremony. No banners. No speeches. Just 5 beings in modified Lazarus suits, strapped into a vessel designed to fall into a temporal abyss. Descent 1 vanished from normal space within seconds of reaching the fracture's boundary. From the outside, time stopped. Even Alliance superluminal relays lost all signal. From inside, it was a different story. Maya experienced the crossing not as oblivion, but as a kaleidoscope of sensation. Her body died again, blood frozen mid-flow. Neurons halted in full cascade. But her mind was anchored differently this time. The Confederation's phase stabilizers kept a sliver of cognition alive, just enough to witness the moment of passing. She saw time twist, saw herself twice, then not at all, and then breath, pain, existence. She awoke in a chamber not constructed by Alliance or Confederation hands. Smooth metal formed strange geometries that hurt to comprehend. Glyphs shimmered in nonlinear progression across the walls. Her team lay scattered, suits flickering with effort, but all alive. They had arrived. In a construct left by something else. Not Alliance. Not Confederation. Not human. It was Vorch who named them later in his reports, the architects. The dormant makers of the fractures. Beings who had used controlled death not as a survival tactic, but as a foundation of travel, communication, perhaps even evolution. Their technology did not defy death. It required it. Their doors opened not to the living, but to those who had passed through it. Maya stood inside the first structure with her heart pounding like thunder. "We weren't the first," she whispered. Alinth, shimmering with phase instability, replied, "But we might be the last who had to guess how it was done." The mission returned 13 hours later. But for Maya, it had been 13 days. Temporal drift confirmed. The serious rift fracture distorted time at a ratio of 24-1. The implications were staggering. Entire missions could be completed with subjective months passing inside, while only minutes passed outside. Exploration of hostile zones, once impossible, was now feasible through Lazarus transit and time dilation. Earth became the nexus. A world once seen as marginal now became the only civilization capable of mediating between the living and the impossible. Its scientists led every expedition. Its volunteers were the ones dying and coming back. And its leaders, once pleading for equal status, now found themselves wielding disproportionate influence across both the Alliance and Confederation. Some celebrated it. Others feared it. Back in Geneva, Earth Security Council met in secret. Admiral Reyes, head of the EDF, stared at the mission reports with something between wonder and dread. "We're not just explorers anymore," he said. "We're crossing barriers no one else understands. And if we keep pushing." Maya, present at the meeting via live holo, cut in. "Then we become what no one else can be." The silence that followed wasn't from uncertainty. It was agreement. Humanity had found its purpose. Not to conquer, not to dominate, but to be the vanguard. The only species willing to die for understanding. And come back demanding more. On the far edge of Confederation-charted space, beyond the reach of most known navigation routes, a new fracture had emerged, one unlike any of the previous void anomalies. It shimmered in violent pulses, oscillating in frequency patterns that seemed intentional. Not just a wound in space, but a signal. A beacon. The Confederation's preliminary scans yielded contradictions, simultaneous mass readings, inconsistent radiation signatures, and the faint imprint of biological rhythm. Something alive pulsed within it. Something that had crossed through once and never returned. The Alliance called it Fracture Zeta 9. Earth called it the Mirror. It was Maya Chin who argued that the Lazarus Protocol alone would not be enough this time. The anomaly wasn't simply a region of void. It was reactive, possibly intelligent, certainly hostile. Previous Lazarus suits had assumed a neutral transit zone. This was different. "We're no longer crossing a dead space," she said at the Lazarus assembly in orbit around Nexus Station. "We're crossing into something that may observe us." Her proposal was radical even by human standards. A dual-layer Lazarus construct. The outer suit would carry the body through physical disintegration and resurrection, as always. But the inner layer, an experimental neural map stabilizer, would act like a memory beacon, preserving a core copy of the traveler's mind state in real time, constantly transmitting back via entangled quantum anchors. In case resurrection failed. In case consciousness was changed. The Confederation was horrified. To split the mind across the void risks madness, Alinth warned. A traveler might return intact, but wrong. Maya nodded. "Then we'll know what's waiting on the other side." She was selected to lead the expedition once again. Not because she volunteered, but because no one else could be trusted to lead others through a place even death might not return from. Descent 9 launched at 0300 UTC from the Lazarus Assembly. 3 human operatives. 2 Confederation observers. 1 mission. Determine the source of the mirror's pulse. The crossing was agony. Maya had grown accustomed to the pain of Lazarus reawakening. But this was different. The void within the mirror did not simply suspend her, it fractured her. For a moment, she was 2 people. 2 thoughts. 2 selves. One dying. One watching. And then, reality snapped. She awoke in a landscape that wasn't space. It was surface. Ground. Sky. But wrong. The sky pulsed with violet spirals that rotated too slowly. The horizon never curved. And the stars above blinked in mathematical sequences, prime numbers. The team emerged around her, confused but alive. But it was not long before they realized the truth. They were not alone. Figures approached, humanoid, but glassy, translucent. They moved like echoes. Each one bore a disturbing familiarity. It was them. Exact copies of the Lazarus team, down to facial expression, clothing, even micro-injuries. The mirror had reflected them. "What is this?" whispered Shin-Tu. Maya stepped forward, her voice firm. It's a test. The mirror was not a fracture in space. It was a recursive simulator, an intelligent filter, a gatekeeper. Not content to merely destroy intruders, it studied them, replicated them, measured them. Over the next 6 hours, the team was subjected to a barrage of interactions with their duplicates. Conversations, combat, memory playback, emotional triggers. It was like the mirror was asking questions in a language made of pain and recognition. And Maya understood. The architects hadn't just traveled through death. They had left behind mechanisms, cosmic customs agents designed to filter minds, measure intent, and determine what kind of beings were worthy to proceed. The mirror wasn't a gateway. It was a judgment. Only one rule emerged from the chaos. Those who feared death, who clung to identity as static, failed the test. Their doubles grew violent, unstable, ultimately turning on them. Of the original 6 members of the expedition, only 2 emerged sane, Maya and Alenth. They returned through the mirror, not walking, not even floating, but falling. The Lazarus reactivation was a violent resurrection. Neural tremors, internal hemorrhaging. Maya bled from her ears for nearly 4 hours. Alenth flickered in and out of phase so wildly the medics had to anchor her consciousness manually. But they were alive. And more importantly, they had passed. The mirror ceased its pulse. And in the depths of its anomaly, a new structure emerged. An invitation, not to Maya, but to humanity. Encrypted coordinates appeared in the Alliance relay systems. Too complex to decrypt by Confederation AI. Too entropic for Alliance crystalline logic. But human pattern recognition cracked it in 3 hours. It was a map, a path to other mirrors, other thresholds, a network. And Maya knew what it meant. The architects had left behind not just tools. They had left expectations. Humanity was no longer the daring infant species playing with resurrection. They were the designated successors, chosen to finish what the architects had started. The data from the mirror fracture was still being analyzed when Earth's Orbital Command Center received a priority signal from Nexus Station. The quantum relay glitched as it processed the transmission, unusual, given the reliability of the link. But the message was unmistakable. A second network signature had activated, and it wasn't coming from a known fracture. It was coming to them. The architects had not just left paths, they had left watchers. Subconscious sentinels embedded in the weave of space-time itself, now responding to humanity's repeated crossings. Something ancient had taken notice, and it was reaching back. The message was not verbal, not mathematical. It was structural. Across half a dozen Lazarus-equipped vessels, diagnostic overlays began to show identical anomalies, tiny fluctuations in quantum resonance, arranged in a Fibonacci-like cascade. Human systems picked it up first. The Alliance dismissed it as noise. The Confederation hesitated, but Maya recognized it immediately. It was a key. Project Lazarus, for all its triumphs, had been operating like a crowbar, forcing passage through barriers nature had never meant to be crossed. But now, the architects were handing over something better. A door handle. The encoded patterns were translated into a 3-dimensional model, revealing an artificial construct orbiting a dead star in the Perseus Veil. No known faction had charted it. No Alliance relay touched it. The Confederation's ancient archives hinted only at rumors, lost probes, strange sensor echoes. But now, coordinates locked, and the path opened. Maya assembled the team herself. This time, no volunteers. Only those who had crossed before and survived. Alenth, Dr. Riva, one of Earth's first Lazarus engineers. 2 human navigators with neural shielding rated for mirror-grade passage. The vessel was Sentinel-1, human-designed, but retrofitted with Confederation biotissue cores and Alliance lattice targeting. It was the first hybrid ship constructed entirely under human oversight. As it launched from Earth, Maya looked back at the blue-white sphere slowly receding behind them. She didn't know when she'd see it again. Riff. The approach to the dead star was uneventful until they got within 1 AU. Then, systems flickered. Not from failure, but interference. Intentional. The ship's AI began to hallucinate, generating false alerts, phantom voices, even simulated crew interactions. But this wasn't a malfunction. This was contact. The dead star was not a star. It was a construct. Hollow. Encoded in gravitational harmonics. Inside it spun a perfect sphere of compressed phase matter, pulsing with signals that repeated Maya's biometric signature. She had been expected. The ship docked automatically, drawn in by forces it could not counter. Inside, Sentinel-1 shut down. Not catastrophically. Peacefully. As if told, rest. We will take it from here. The crew disembarked into silence. The interior was vast, cathedral-like, with no clear origin point. Material shimmered between states, appearing stone one moment, metallic the next, and occasionally, transparent. Beneath their feet, glyphs pulsed in a rhythm that matched Maya's heartbeat. The architects were gone, but not absent. They had anticipated successors, beings who would learn not to fight death, but dance with it, who would not fear disintegration but use it as language. Maya's team was led into chambers that seemed to respond to thought. Passageways reconfigured around intent. Environmental conditions adapted in real time. And at the heart of it all, a chamber. Inside, a humanoid figure, or the memory of one. Not alive, not dead. Encoded. It spoke with no sound. But each of them heard the same words, in their own language. You have crossed. You have returned. You seek meaning in fracture and rebirth. You are not the first, but you may be the last. The entity explained not with grammar, but with feeling. Flashes of civilizations before, thousands of species who had tried what humans now succeeded at. All had failed to fully accept what humanity had embraced, that identity could dissolve and still return. That death was not an obstacle, but a function. The architects had created the fractures as tests, and Maya's people had passed. A panel opened behind the chamber. Not mechanical, more like an event unfolding. Inside, a crystalline lattice spun slowly, generating a singularity held in stasis. Around it were 10 orbs, each pulsing with energy. 10 gates, Riva whispered. 10 paths. Each orb represented a region beyond known space. Places where reality folded differently. Where thought, time, gravity, even self were mutable. Places only humans, by design or madness, could explore. The entity pulsed once more. You are the last vanguard. In your death, a path opens. In your return, a message is carried. Will you proceed? Maya stepped forward. She didn't speak for Earth, or the Alliance, or the Confederation. She spoke for the only truth that had ever mattered. Yes. The lattice shimmered, and one orb detached. Coordinates locked. The first path was chosen, and Sentinel-1 became humanity's first expeditionary vessel into the Architect's domain, a place where even Lazarus protocols might not be enough. Back on Earth, Admiral Vorch received the final data burst before the ship disappeared from known space. He read Maya's final transmission 3 times, then sent it to every Alliance and Confederation Council. It was only one sentence. We are already more than what we were. The passage into the Architect's domain was nothing like the previous crossings. There was no disintegration, no neural agony. Instead, Sentinel-1 was simply displaced. One moment the stars of Perseus Vale shimmered in the view screen. The next, they were gone, replaced by a sky that was not black, but a deep shifting violet, dotted with structures that moved like stars, yet cast no light. The crew of Sentinel-1 awoke disoriented, not from resurrection, but from reconfiguration. Time had not passed. Time had stopped. Dr. Riva was the first to speak. According to internal sensors, the ship is holding position. But external readings show movement on a scale I can't quantify. Maya stood near the viewport, watching a vast construct drift across the sky like a continent made of starlight. We're not in a place, she said. We're in a system of thresholds. Each of the 10 gates revealed by the lattice had led to a distinct region. This one, designated Gate 1, had been codenamed the Fold. It operated on quantum superposition principles. Everything existed in multiple states at once. To navigate it, you had to choose to observe. And in doing so, collapse the possibilities. That was the trap. That was the lesson. As Maya's crew explored the interior of the sector, they encountered phenomena that defied classification. Structures that only appeared if you believed they existed. Pathways that extended indefinitely until someone doubted they could continue, then collapsed into solid walls. But more than that, there were signs of other visitors. Not recent. Ancient. Ruins constructed from entropy-stabilized matter. Glyphs that echoed the architecture from the Dead Star. And in some corners, echoes. Not voices. Not ghosts. But impressions of memory. A war had taken place here. One not of weapons, but of interpretation. Species before them had tried to impose structure on the Fold, and had been erased for their arrogance. Humanity's advantage was subtle. They didn't expect the universe to follow their rules. They adapted. When the Fold presented a maze, they let it reshape them. When it presented a riddle, they answered with paradox. When it demanded death, they offered it, and returned with new questions. Each step forward wasn't a conquest, it was a conversation. And gradually, the Fold responded. Sentinel-1 systems began to reconfigure, not through software updates, but through exposure. The ship's AI began generating patterns it hadn't been programmed with. The walls of the vessel absorbed trace energies from the domain and adapted on a molecular level. It wasn't infection. It was evolution. Dr. Riva recorded the transformation obsessively. The ship is becoming native, she whispered. We're no longer just visitors. We're being translated. Maya began to dream in structures. Her sleep was filled with vast geometry, cathedrals of logic, collapsing equations, galaxies folded into single syllables. When she awoke, she sketched symbols she couldn't read but understood. Elinth analyzed them. These are resonance markers, she said. Keys. Interfaces. And eventually, they found the core. A place within the Fold where the rules clarified, if only momentarily. A sphere hovered at the center of a symmetrical field, surrounded by floating monuments constructed of pure gravitational memory. The crew approached it with reverence. It spoke without speaking. You have adapted. Most do not. Maya stood before the sphere and asked the question that had burned since they crossed. Are we the first to reach this point? You are the first to survive it. The implication was clear. Thousands had tried. All had failed, not because they lacked strength or knowledge, but because they refused to let go of certainty. Maya knelt before the sphere, not in submission, but in recognition. We're ready to see more. The sphere pulsed, and a map unfolded, not in space, but in thought. It entered the minds of the crew simultaneously, imprinting directions, symbols, concepts. Not all of it made sense, but one truth echoed across every neural channel. The fold is one of 10. Each a lesson, each a gate. Completion is not guaranteed. Passage demands surrender. Surrender of what? Self, memory, form, time, meaning. Each region of the architect's domain would demand something new. Maya returned to the ship with the knowledge. They had passed the first test not by domination, but by dissolution. They had become porous, letting the fold reshape them without losing themselves entirely. The journey back was instantaneous. One blink, and Sentinel-1 was once again in orbit above the Dead Star, time resuming as if it had paused for a breath. But everything had changed. The vessel was no longer purely human. The crew no longer purely themselves. They were becoming the translators, a hybrid form of life capable of carrying knowledge from beyond logic and returning intact. At Nexus Station, their re-entry was greeted with stunned silence. Medical scans couldn't explain the neural harmonics. Confederation face scanners refused to classify Maya's signature. Alliance AI systems displayed reverent hesitation in her presence. And across Earth, the phrase began to spread. The first gate is open. Maya stood before the newly formed Joint Command of the Alliance and Confederation, now headquartered in orbit, and addressed them with a calm forged in the void. There are 9 more. No one interrupted, because deep down, every species listening now understood. This was no longer a human experiment. This was humanity becoming something else. Maya Chun had ceased to be just a captain. She was no longer merely a representative of Earth, or even the Lazarus Project. After the fold, she had become the face of a new threshold species, an organism that did not resist annihilation, but flowed through it. She and her team had transcended the line between explorer and construct. They weren't just returning from death. They were returning changed. The second gate was revealed within 72 hours of their return, not through quantum signal or cartographic anomaly, but through Maya herself. In her dreams, a lattice of coordinates formed. When tested against existing star maps, they pointed to a region behind the gravitational veil of the Kepler abyss, a sector believed to be completely collapsed under interstellar pressure. Yet the coordinates led to a corridor, a fracture suspended between 2 black holes, neither of which should have permitted travel. It became known as Gate 2. Codename, the Silence. Sentinel-1 was recalibrated with full derived augmentations. Alliance observers petitioned for inclusion, and the Confederation insisted on monitoring neural coherence. Maya denied both. This is not a diplomatic mission, she told the Joint Command. You don't send bureaucrats into the throat of entropy. Only those who had crossed the fold and survived were allowed. The second voyage launched with far less ceremony. No transmissions, no fanfare, just departure. The Silence was aptly named. As Sentinel-1 approached, every comm signal died. Not jammed, cancelled. Sound within the ship dulled. Internal systems slowed, despite optimal conditions. Even thoughts became heavy, thick with interference. Riva described it as thinking through water. Time didn't freeze. It dampened. Once inside the Silence, the stars vanished. The crew's senses no longer aligned. Maya saw corridors stretching into infinity, while Alinth saw a light that looped inside itself. Riva heard a deep hum pulsing at the edge of perception, like a voice too slow to parse. But there was structure. A tower, impossibly tall, suspended on nothing, stretching upward forever. At its base, a door. On it, a single symbol. Human. Ancient. An omega. The last letter. The end. The team ascended. Each floor they passed brought memories, not projections, but embodied experience. Maya relived the horizon disaster. Felt her lungs collapse again. Saw the void outside the hull swallow her. But it wasn't memory, it was presence. Her body spasmed with the sensations of suffocation, even as she walked forward. Next, she stood again before the Alliance Council, the moment she challenged their quarantine ruling. But this time, the council was made of herself, infinite iterations judging her choices. Riva saw her father, lost to neural decay. She conversed with him for hours, only to realize it wasn't him, but a simulation built from her regrets. The Silence was not a place. It was a mirror of grief. Not emotional grief, existential. Each traveler was tested not by what they had lost, but by what they had become to survive the loss. It took them 9 subjective days to reach the top of the tower. At its peak, nothing. Just a void, hanging in the shape of a doorway. And beyond it, the sensation of listening to your own death being read aloud. Alinth began to phase uncontrollably, struggling to maintain dimensional coherence. Riva wept openly, her memories overwhelmed by recursive loops. Only Maya remained still. She stepped through, and woke up on Earth, alone, in her childhood home, Uniged, unchanged. Outside the window, stars flowed backward. She walked through her past, school corridors, launch academies, old streets long demolished. No one spoke. Nothing moved. This was not illusion. This was compression. The silence was collapsing her reality into a digestible echo, testing her reaction to permanence. Eventually, she found a single person waiting in the center of a dark city, herself. Older, scarred, dressed in a uniform she didn't recognize. "I'm who you become," the double said. "If you keep going." Maya asked, "What's the cost?" Her reflection answered, "Everything that made you want to begin." And then, she returned. No time had passed. The tower was gone. Sentinel-1 stood in normal space, fully intact. Alenth and Riva were unconscious but stable. Their neural scans showed unfamiliar harmonics, new patterns that mapped emotional experiences onto dimensional layers. They had passed. The silence was satisfied. Back in Nexus Station, data analysis began at once. The tower, now understood to be the spire of reconciliation, left no physical trace. But the crew had returned with impressions, concepts translated into data that couldn't be stored in conventional formats. Emotional architecture, memory scaffolds, self-reference loops. The silence didn't teach information. It taught acceptance, that some thresholds could not be fought or reasoned with. They could only be endured. The Joint Command met again, this time more sober. Alliance Science Director Tovas, once skeptical of Earth's role, now admitted, "You're navigating territories no civilization has ever survived. We no longer know what you are." Maya, calm and composed, replied, "We're not explorers anymore. We're messengers. The domains don't just test us, they show us who we are, who we might become." "And what comes next?" the Confederation asked. Maya looked out the window, toward the stars that seemed smaller now. "Next comes the domain of fire. Gate 3. She had seen it in a dream. A star that breathes. A forge of thought. And a challenge that would not be metaphysical, but violent. Gate 3 ignited before Earth's telescopes ever found it. A fusion storm burst into existence within the collapsed remnants of the Phoenix dwarf galaxy. Once dark matter territory, now home to an impossible flare burning in unnatural rhythm. At its core, a star pulsing not by fusion cycles, but in binary. On, off, on, off. It was blinking. It was signaling. The message wasn't light speed. It was instantaneous. Humans dubbed it the Forge, and Gate 3 had opened. Sentinel-1 was now considered an extension of human thought, a vessel partially alive, constantly learning. Its fold-borne systems had absorbed the resonance of the silence, and its hull was now inscribed with shifting equations only Maya could understand. Preparations were swift. This time, for crew members embarked. Maya, Riva, Alenth, and Tovas, the Alliance Science Director who had once doubted, now desperate to understand. Gate 3 did not behave like the others. There was no boundary crossing, no transition into void or folded space. Sentinel-1 was seized. Not violently, effortlessly. The star became a mouth, and they were swallowed into a place that felt like fusion made conscious. Inside, there was heat, but not of matter. Thought heat. Emotion burning at physical intensity. The ship's internal temperature dropped below freezing, while every organic sensor screamed of fire. "This place is alive," Alenth whispered, body phasing in short-circuit rhythm. The Forge did not test identity. It tested will. Physical laws became inconsistent. Metal softened under defiance, then hardened when embraced. Thoughts directed reality, if believed hard enough. They found themselves separated. Maya stood in a landscape of metal and fire, where ancient machines bled plasma and screamed in a language she understood without knowing why. Riva wandered through a corridor of unmade machines, each one pulsing with the failed memories of past travelers. Alenth drifted in and out of molten light, her multi-phase biology resonating with unseen harmonics. And Tovas stood on a floating platform before a dying sun that whispered every regret he had never voiced. In time, they realized, the Forge was not testing them alone. It was making them. Each of them underwent individual trials, but their outcomes reflected on one another. Riva faced the embodiment of failure, a projection of every Lazarus volunteer who had died permanently. She was forced to justify each choice, each risk. Tovas had to confront the cost of his ignorance, his arrogance that had once dismissed the human capacity for this journey. He heard his own voice looped back at him. "You are too primitive to lead." Alenth phased into communion with a machine being that seemed built of orbiting suns. It spoke to her not in words, but in the frequency of transformation. She learned that the Forge builds succession, that every civilization capable of reaching this point must forge a new version of itself to survive. Maya burned. She stood in a crucible formed of thought metal, her own form disassembling molecule by molecule. Not pain, not death, just reconstruction. She was being unmade, not to destroy, but to be cast anew. When the process ended, she saw herself in a reflection not made of glass, but of memory. Her scars were gone. Her age restored to when she had first stepped aboard Horizon, years ago. But her eyes, those had never been older. She understood then. The Forge didn't make warriors. It made vessels, beings capable of containing what came next. The reunion of the crew was instantaneous. They awoke aboard Sentinel-1 as if no time had passed. Yet each of them bore signs of transformation. Riva could now read the shifting walls of the ship like text. A length pulsed in rhythm with gravitational fluctuations. Tovas no longer doubted. He believed. Maya simply stood in silence. In her mind, coordinates pulsed, Gate 4. Already waiting. As Sentinel-1 exited the Forge, a structure followed them, a construct of solidified stellar light. It folded into space and parked itself in orbit over Nexus Station. A gift. The Forge had not just tested. It had responded. The structure, now called the Crucible, was analyzed by every civilization with access to the data. It couldn't be replicated. It couldn't be moved. It belonged to humanity. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the Alliance passed a unanimous resolution. Humanity would no longer be treated as a junior species. Earth was granted permanent leadership over all void-crossing operations. The Confederation followed, establishing a Lazarus embassy in low Earth orbit. Humanity had become the path, but with power came unease. The Crucible was a message, yes, but also a warning. Inside, researchers found archives, fragments of other species that had tried and failed. Entire civilizations, burned in arrogance or shattered by resistance. The message was clear. You are the last candidate. Maya reviewed the data and said nothing. She didn't have to. Everyone already knew. Gate 4 was open, and it was waiting. Gate 4 was unlike the others. Not hidden, not encoded. It arrived. Not in space, but in time. Without warning, a region of the Orion arm froze. Not physically, but causally. Cause and effect inverted. Ships reported navigating events before they happened. Communications became recursive. One Alliance frigate received its own distress signal before entering the anomaly. At the center, a perfect sphere, orbiting nothing. Not a construct. Not a fracture. A moment, suspended in place. And within it, echoes of voices not yet spoken. The architects had left this gate for last, or perhaps first, if chronology no longer mattered. The gate was called the Paradox. And this time, Maya didn't wait for approval. She gathered a crew of 5. Riva, Elenth, Tovas, Admiral Vorch himself, now fully committed to the journey he once called heresy, and herself. Sentinel-1 approached the Paradox slowly. Every instrument failed to describe its nature. Not because it defied physics, but because it rewrote them. The moment they crossed the threshold, reality collapsed into narrative. They were no longer aboard the ship. They were stories, flowing into one another. Maya lived dozens of lives, variations of herself. Soldier, scientist, mother, martyr. She watched Earth fall, rise, diverge, unify. In one life, she never left orbit. In another, she led an interstellar rebellion. Riva experienced every death she'd ever prevented, and every one she had caused through inaction. Tovas lived the life of a Terran child, then of a Confederation elder, then of a machine dreaming it was a man. Vorch saw his species extinguished and reborn, crystal shattered and reformed, again and again. And Elenth dissolved entirely, becoming an idea that drifted across the paradox like vapor. Each was given a choice. Return to what they were, or ascend to what they might become. Maya chose neither. She merged. Her consciousness expanded sideways, inhabiting every variant of herself until choice itself became meaningless. She understood the final message of the architects. We never survived the domain. We became it. They had not left tests to find a successor. They had left doors so someone would complete them. Maya became the final architect, not by power, but by perspective. She returned to the moment of crossing and chose to bring her team back, not as humans, not as alliance, but as bridges. Sentinel-1 exited the paradox not through space, but through understanding. The vessel reappeared above Earth orbit. To observers, it had only been gone seconds. But the ship was different. So were the people inside. Maya stepped out alone. The others would follow in time, but they needed silence. The stars had changed, not in position, in meaning. Because now, humanity understood. Earth held its breath. At Nexus Station, a new council had formed, alliance, confederation, and human leadership as equals. They looked to her, and one delegate asked, quietly, "What now?" Maya's reply was simple, unshaken. "Now we build the next gate." The paradox had not been the end. It had been a handoff. The architects were gone, the domain complete. The gatekeepers had passed on their legacy. And humanity, ever bold, ever impossible, was no longer just a species. They were a civilization of crossings, of thresholds, of death, rebirth, and what lay after. A race not defined by what they avoided, but by what they entered willingly. The final record of Sentinel-1 ended with one last transmission. We are the bridge. We are the Void Walkers. And we will not stop.